Hello and welcome back to McClaren Performance for an episode today where I want to talk about Jesse Lingard. There's a lot of noise, a lot of conversation around this player, and I want to take a closer look into that. I want to cover everything today. I want to cover the character of Jesse Lingard, his career at Manchester United and at other clubs. I want to talk about his TikTok, his J Lings brand, and talk about his transfer to Forest as well, and all the criticism going on around that. I think there's a lot happening there that isn't being said, isn't being talked about. Not just about the move itself, his move not going for West Ham and going for Forest instead, but I think a lot of conversation around Jesse Lingard himself, his character and the things he does outside of football. I think there's a lot of depth within that to talk about with regards to psychology and kind of the changes in football also. But just with Jesse Lingard as a player, I think there's so much to talk about just in that. He's had such a strange kind of career coming from Manchester United. He came through that academy since I think about 7 years old and took with that quite a bit of time to actually find his way into the first team. Because of that, he was on loan at a lot of different places. I got that here in terms of going to Birmingham, going to Leicester, going to Brighton, going to Derby, and obviously most recently going to West Ham as well. He's had a lot of loan moves for a player, and within that time he's always had his sitting within Manchester United. Overall though, at Manchester United he has had 231 appearances. In that time he had 35 goals and 21 assists, which isn't great stats. He's not had a great career specifically just at Manchester United. In fact, his best season was, I think, in 2017-2018 under Jose Mourinho with 33 league appearances, only 8 goals and 6 assists. So that really encapsulates Jesse Lingard at Manchester United. That really was his best season. But to give Jesse Lingard the benefit of the doubt, he came through at a time when Manchester United were really in a bit of a transition. By the time he was coming towards the first team, I think was under David Moyes at that time, and he was on loan again at that point as well. But still, within Manchester United, he was only under just lots of different managers, lots of different regimes, and obviously performances suffered across the board really for Manchester United players over those 10 years. But that's really where the criticism starts for Jesse Lingard in terms of him squandering a career at Manchester United and not making the best of that opportunity. So it is the question in terms of, was he a victim of that environment, of the change in management and coaching all the time, or is it a question of him and his character and not being able to take advantage of the situation and grow within that environment and become stable within the starting 11 of that team? And where people have been more critical of his character and his talents and his ability to be a professional player, I think I'm going to be a bit less harsh on Jesse Lingard. And the reason for that is because, yes, as I always talk about, environment changes a player so much, and in this case it seems the case that Manchester United had a big effect on Jesse Lingard. And the reason I do say that, and the only real lifeline that Jesse Lingard has with regards to his ability as a player, is when he went on loan with West Ham, I think 2 seasons ago now, and doing something incredible there. I've got here 16 appearances, having 9 goals and 5 assists, and really helping West Ham secure European football that season. In that sense, he really is a prime example of how players change in a different environment. So go back to that statistic again of 70% of human behaviour being changed by a person's environment. In one environment in Manchester United, he's not quite that player. He's not quite making those goals, quite making those assists, quite making an impact in the first team at all, really. But then at West Ham, given confidence, given time under David Moyes and given that kind of patience and understanding, he seems to do really well in different environments, specifically that being West Ham. And again, where people have been critical, I kind of feel sorry for him a little bit. You know, he goes to West Ham, has this unbelievable performance, proves that he is this type of player who can make an impact at Manchester United. So next season he goes back to Manchester United. Ollie seems to imply, or at least says to him, that he will give him opportunity, he will give him game time. I remember I was at Derby. I watched, I think, Man United a friendly at Derby, and I was there watching the game. I remember seeing Jesse Lingard. He performed really well. I remember that. And I remember him talking to Ollie. They seemed really friendly. They seemed like, you know, he had him under his arms a bit and he was ready to look after him. But ultimately, that's not what happened in the season. He didn't give him those opportunities. And so it's hard for me to be critical of Jesse Lingard. You don't know what's going on behind the scenes. So, yeah, you don't know why he is or isn't starting, but also you can argue he's not had that opportunity to prove what he can do as a player. And so that leads to him now having that opportunity to leave Manchester United. He has an option of clubs to go to, and that's really where all this criticism has come back. Again, I believe he was looking at lots of different opportunities, lots of different clubs. It appeared to be the option that he could sign for West Ham, and that seemed to be the club that everybody really wanted him to sign for, seeing as he had such good performances there just a few seasons ago. But with that, though, of course, there were then rumours about Nottingham Forest, and Forest showing interest in Jesse Lingard, willing to pay quite a lot of money to take him away from West Ham. So the player's left with a choice between West Ham, a club where he's played about 2 seasons ago for about 16 games, played really well there. A choice between that and a club that has just been promoted in Nottingham Forest, maybe possibly going to go back down again. And he weighs up those options and picks Nottingham Forest at the end of the day. And obviously with that, there is some amount of criticism. One criticism that I've heard quite a lot, and I think really is the main criticism, is that it's not, the right football choice. With West Ham, you have that option for European football, and with that, Jesse Lingard then has that chance to reinvigorate his career, get that respect again with regards to his football, and come back to the type of player that he should be with regards to the talent that he does have. And that really is the main criticism that I can understand. I think a player with his ability should have that aspiration to want to be able to play European football and prove himself on that stage, which he can do. However, we don't know the circumstances of why he chose Forest over West Ham. I think it always comes back down to what is actually going on behind the scenes, what we don't know. A lot of people in the media talking about the situation don't know what options Jesse Lingard had in front of him, what decisions he had to make with regards to moving family or whatever. So I think there's always many things around decisions like that, not just a simple what's right for my football career in terms of playing European football or not. To be honest though, I think that is a main criticism that I can get behind and I can understand. Maybe a player like that should have more aspirations, but I don't think it's worthy of the amount of criticism that the player has had over the past few days. There's also a lot of talk around the fact that he owes West Ham or he owes David Moyes, which I think is a stupid argument really. They saw the ability that the player had. They took advantage of that in signing him. They paid him money and they used his talents. He performed for them over 16 games. He helped them get European football. I don't know what part he owes to them. I think he's proven enough times he has that ability in him to sign for lots of different teams. So I think that argument is a little bit invalid. The one criticism that is going around a lot though, that is quite interesting, I think, is that he's made this move for monetary reasons. So I think the report is that West Ham were offering so much. I don't think anybody is actually quite aware of how much West Ham were offering. But the reports are that Forest were offering more money. I think it was around, or supposedly, £200,000 a week for Jesse Lingard. So, and apparently, and these are what the narrative is at least, is that Jesse Lingard was tempted by this money and went for that offer instead over his loyalty to West Ham and whatever they were offering at the time. And you know what, that actually, it might be the case, but I think there's so many holes within that story, especially as I've looked into it more. I don't think that may actually be the case. It may be, but I don't think we should be so definitively talking about it as if money-hungry Jesse Lingard went to Nottingham Forest to play poor football instead of taking less money and playing in European football. For one, I've not seen anywhere where anyone said that West Ham have offered a certain amount of money. I don't think I can find a number really anywhere with regards to that, at least not a specific number that everybody can concur on. So there's that hole in the argument there. But alongside that, there's also so many different reports of how much Forest are actually willing to pay Jesse Lingard as well. When I first heard the story and everything going around, I was under the assumption that it was £200,000 a week. That's the number that I'd heard everywhere. And when you hear that number, you think it, and I think everyone thinks, oh, he's gone for the money, because that's a lot of money. And Nottingham Forest have broken the bank for him. They've gone way above their wage structure to get him. And obviously he's just jumped on that opportunity. But I've seen so many reports since wanting to do this video, looking into it more. There's so many different numbers that lots of different outlets are talking about. So apparently I've heard £130,000 a week plus bonuses on top of that. I've also heard maybe might be even as low as £80,000 a week plus bonuses that would bring that to 120,000 a week. I think Sky Sports reported it was 115,000 a week plus incentives. So there's so many different numbers going around. And my conclusion from that really is that nobody has a clue. Nobody knows what the actual number is, and nobody knows what he's getting paid. Nobody knows what West Ham offered him, and nobody knows what Nottingham Forest are going to give him. So I don't know where this narrative's come from. It might be true, but there's no way it's definitively true. There's no way that it's fact, and there's no real evidence to say that it is the case. So a lot of conversation around Jesse Lingard at the moment is kind of founded on these things that aren't real. So why are we even having this conversation about Jesse Lingard when a player's just obviously just had options within front of him, and he's just made the choice of what club he wants to go to, dependent on lots of different factors. So, and that's the same with every transfer. Every player's decision is exactly the same. So why are we talking about this one more than we are about any player going anywhere else? And that's especially the case when you look at Forest, and yes, they are a newly promoted side. But like I talked about last episode with who I think is going to get relegated or not, I think Forest are really building something where they're trying to stay within the Premier League. And obviously, Jesse Lingard has talked to Steve Cooper, and they obviously have an idea of what they're going to do at the club and how they're going to take the club forward. And he's obviously invested in that and wants to be a part of that. They're making lots of different signings. So it's not going to be the Nottingham Forest that was in the Championship. There may be real potential there, and there may be real potential for Jesse Lingard to be a part of something that will build within the next few years. Also, talking about wages, I think there's so much more to wages and money than there is actually about a player earning money and earning as much money as possible, which, by the way, is something the players should do, is earn as much money as possible while they can. I think there's another side to it as well, as when a club puts money on the table is a judgment of what they think of the player and how much worth they think he is to the club. And I think there's a lot of ego to do with that as well. We talk about it with regards to the hierarchy and the structure of a team. A lot of that has to do with money, even though players shouldn't discuss that. It is obviously discussed and known to a certain extent, and that contributes to the hierarchy and the dynamics within the team. So making judgments based on that isn't just, I want to make so much money and make as much money as possible. It's also the club saying, we want you this much. And if you look at that and say, oh, they don't want me enough and this club wants me more, then I see that as a valid reason to then make that choice. So really, why is this big news and why are we talking about this? Why do I go on TalkSport? And that is a lot of the topic of conversation is about Jesse Lingard. And I think it has a lot to do with his character and what he's like, and then the things he does outside of football. That's the only reason I can think as to why this is being talked about so much. Because Jesse Lingard, I think, definitely does have a different personality from most football players. But I think specifically, he has a different personality and character from the old traditional footballer, say, maybe 10, 15 years ago. There's a quote, and I saw it quite a while ago, and I always kept it in mind, not really thinking I'd use it for anything, but I always thought it was so interesting. I guess it kind of fits this discussion. It was from Wayne Rooney talking about Manchester United. He says, I remember once when I got to training the day after a loss, I was still so angry and went into the locker room with Michael Carrick, and we found Jesse Lingard and Paul Pogba dancing to music, and our mentality was different than that of the modern players. And I think that is such an interesting quote and really shows the shift in football, the difference between, like I said, footballers 10, 15 years ago and footballers now. And I think Jesse Lingard is really the tip of the iceberg. He's the peak of how players have changed from then. And in that quote, I think it's kind of shown as a negative thing. I think within Manchester United, it maybe was in a way, but I don't think it's about players changing. I also think it's about coaches and clubs changing and adapting to be able to manage and encourage these individuals. Because I think saying, dancing to music after a loss, yes, you can see that as a negative thing quite easily. That player doesn't care, they're not bothered. But I think players, lots of different players, have lots of different ways of coping with situations, and they have lots of different ways of expressing themselves and doing what they want to do. I'm not someone who's dancing to music or doing anything like that, but there's players now and people now that want to do that and want to be like that, and I don't think they should be so massively criticised for that, especially in this case, footballers shouldn't be so massively criticised for that. There is a new generation now that wants to be more outgoing, more creative, more individualistic, and I think fighting against that isn't the best thing to do. I think that should be encouraged. I think for performance especially, self-expression is a massive part. With this generation of players, and I try and teach it myself, is that you should allow players to self-express on the pitch. In that sense, they feel the most comfortable and they are most likely to perform in the best way. Of course, you have the structure and the limits of the tactics and the formation and the style of play, the principles of play, they always are in place. But within that, a player should be allowed to be creative. And I say that about on the pitch, but I also think off the pitch as well, that should be the case. I mean, is it really any coincidence, let's say with Jesse Lingard, that at Manchester United, where even there you can see being criticised for being that type of individual, then you see him move to West Ham, be over the top with his celebration and do the things that he wants to do. You find a better performance within that player because he's in an environment where he's being encouraged. That's kind of speculation, but it is really an example of, yes, players change in environments and it's dependent on how much self-expression they're allowed. And right now, in this day and age, I don't like this, is that players are criticised for self-expression, for being their own kind of self, doing the things that they want to do, especially when those things are different from what is the traditional football culture. It may be a leap, and I don't want to get too preachy about all of this, but I think it does have its connection, it does have its foundations in the sort of oppression that we do see in football, the oppression of, say, the women's game for over 50 years, but the oppression of many things, the lack of, say, gay players within football. It's strange that there isn't more players being openly gay within football, but when you look at things like this, where, say, Jesse Lingard is as expressive as he is, and how much criticism he gets for that, how much talk he gets for a transfer that he makes, it's no surprise that these players aren't comfortable in being more outgoing and doing different things, because as soon as they do, it becomes a great topic within football and they should be staying within their lane of being a footballer. And that kind of leads me on to the other topic of why I think Jesse Lingard is getting so much criticism at the moment, aside from what the story actually is. I think he gets a lot of criticism because of the work he does outside of being a footballer, and that he doesn't actually commit 100% of his time to playing football. And to be fair, a lot of players do that. I think another example is Marcus Rashford, who does a lot of work outside of football with regards to charity and the things that he cares about. And yes, he does receive some criticism for that, but I think Jesse Lingard especially receives a lot of criticism. Again, I think it's because of that self-expressive kind of work that he's doing. It's not very football orientated. It's very artistic and creative and different, and it gets criticism because of that. And that's another interesting thing about Jesse Lingard, really, is this whole J Lings brand. And do the thing, the J Lings, there you go. Great. But it's interesting why that gets so much criticism. It's interesting all the work that he wants to do. I find it, I quite like it. At first, when I wanted to do the video talking about it, I thought, all this J Lings and doing all these things, and but as I looked more into it, I quite like the guy. I quite like what he's trying to do. I like that he's being self-expressive. I like that he's trying out different things and he's facing the criticism for it and carrying on doing it anyway. When you look into it more, I think it's not such a bad thing. So yeah, he has this J-Lings brand. Really, in 2018, it's a clothing line, the J-Lings clothing line, or whatever you want to call it. Selling hats and T-shirts and hoodies and jackets, and having his own aftershave, and selling iPhone cases with the whole J-Lings thing on the back of that as well. And he's done all of that since 2018, and obviously he faced a lot of criticism for it at the time. I think it was Roy Keane, Gary Neville, who criticised that quite a lot. I think it was other players as well who were very critical of it. I think it was at a time when Manchester United was struggling, his performances were struggling as well. So there were many aspects to it. Again, going back to the media and their criticism of Jesse Lingard and the things he does, I believe at the time it was reported there were losses, funny to say a number, losses of over £200,000 in his first year of trading. However, looking into that deeper, it was the reports were only within half a year of actually selling products and then measured over the full year. So it's not entirely accurate and a bit kind of manipulating the narrative a little bit there. The clothing line is still around, so it can't have been doing that bad. It can't have had those bigger losses for it to still carry on now. It must still be doing well. So it's quite interesting how that was criticised by the media straight away. And if it made losses, like, who cares? I'm sure he'll be all right. I'm sure it doesn't matter. It's that he can do what he wants. He's playing football. He's doing the thing that he wants to do. And he's doing other things alongside that as well, in his own kind of self-expressive way. I wish that was celebrated more than it was criticised. Last year as well, he bought an esports team, which is quite different, now called, obviously, Jay Ling's Esports, and apparently they play a game, this is what I don't know, called Rainbow Six Siege. I don't know what that is. Yeah. And I think that's quite interesting in terms of putting his time into that. I think there is a future in esports, and I think he's just looking at it in a business sense in terms of, he likes playing games, buy a team, get invested in that. That will be the future, and I think he might be right in that case. There is definitely an avenue within esports to go down. I think there was a quote in an article that was quite interesting in terms of him saying how he's footballer first and foremost, but in his downtime, likes to try different things, and in regards to the clothing line and buying esports teams and things like that. I think that's quite understandable. I think it is, all this stuff is good, it's fine. I don't think a player is always 24/7. A player needs to be dedicated to training at whatever time that is during the day, and make sure they're turning up at games as well. But in the time in between that, when a lot of the time they are resting, I think it's all right to invest in some of these things and try all these different things out. I think what's really getting criticised deep down, if you look into it, is that these are all different things. They're not things I want to do. Like, I'm not going around doing J-Lings and doing dances and making a clothing line and buying an esports team and playing Rainbow Six Siege, whatever that is. But he has a right to do it, and it shouldn't be criticised so much. I think it's because all these things go against the tradition of what football has been and what footballers do. And I hope he does go on. I've done this video, and at first I thought, he's all right, Jesse Lingard. And I've gone on through all this stuff, and now I'm like, I love him. I think I might be the only person. I'm not doing all the things he's doing. I'm not going to go on TikTok anytime soon. But I like that he's doing all his own stuff and doing all his own things. I think that's good. I think that's a good thing. I think players should be encouraged to do that. And at the moment, they're not being encouraged to do that. Why not? Why do they have to be, as long as they're not breaking the law, why do they have to be like blank slates of nothing all the time? Surely we want self-expression. We want people to be doing all these things. Because when you really dig deep into what just the surface level conversation is at the moment with regards to a player making a transfer to a club that has just been promoted to the Premier League, if you look deeper than that, there's a much bigger conversation really being had about self-expression and what players are allowed to do outside of football, how different it's allowed to be, how personal it's allowed to be, how creative or artistic it's allowed to be, what a football player is now, how they've shifted from what they were 10, 15 years ago to the different generation now of what players are capable of doing, how much money they receive, and what they should actually be doing with that money. How controlled should players be in clubs? Should they be allowed to do these things? Of course they should be allowed to do these things, as long as they are within their contract doing what they've signed on to do. They are doing the work they are paid for and giving their best performances in training and on the pitch. Why can't they go on TikTok and do dances at the same time? I think it's quite ignorant to critique that and to say that's not right. I think Simon Jordan said in terms of, he'll be remembered more as a TikToker than a footballer. And sometimes it's like, well, so what if he is? Like, I think at Manchester United, I think some aspect of it, he's been criticised because he hasn't performed well at Manchester United. But you don't know the extenuating circumstances around that. You don't know how much that has to do with the character and personality of Jesse Lingard, or just the situation of Manchester United itself. And if problems are being had at Manchester United and he's gone away and done all these other things, then good on him to get out of that situation and do things outside of football. I've grown up in my life not wanting to really be a footballer, so I think I look at it a bit differently. Is, who cares? It's not everybody's ambition to play European football. Maybe he's just really good at football, and he just wanted to sign for Forest to even maybe just get a bit more money, but just to be part of something different that allows him to do all the things that he wants to do. What's wrong with that? He's not hurting anyone doing that. And ultimately, in a lot of ways, I think a lot of this criticism is rooted in the homophobia that's around football more so than it is in everything else. And I think that's maybe the real discussion that should be had. I think we don't talk about that enough. There's aspects as well in football in terms of allegations of assault and things like that. I don't think that's even talked about enough. It's definitely not talked about more than Jesse Lingard doing his TikTok dances. So why are we not talking about those things? Why are we talking about these things instead? There's bigger problems in football than that, and bigger criticisms to be made of players than that as well. It's quite interesting, I think. Yeah, and that really wraps it up for me. It's quite a long one there. I wasn't expecting to talk about Jesse Lingard for so long, but I think there's a lot within it and a lot not being said about it and things that should be said. And, I quite like to dig deep into what those things are. So I hope it wasn't too boring. Make sure you subscribe if you watched all the way. Definitely make sure you like the video, or if you're on the podcast on Spotify, on Apple, on Google, make sure you give a good rating as well. That would be nice. Thank you for watching and listening as always. And I'll see you again hopefully on Friday.